Okay, well, good morning again. For folks that are just joining in, this is the data submission best practices call for the Virginia Broadband Availability Map, more commonly known as the Commonwealth Connection. I'm Chandler Vaughn. I work as a senior policy analyst in the Office of Broadband. And this project is a partnership with the Virginia Tech Center for Geospatial Information Technology. So there are partners on developing the Commonwealth Connection. This is the second iteration of that map. We appreciate folks on the call. I see a lot of familiar faces from last year's process that submitted their service territory data last year that we were able to develop a product that's been used widely across the state for broadband availability mapping. We've seen this product used in local government comprehensive plans. We've been able to reference it for constituent emails. So, I want to drive home before we get started with this data submission best practices call that this tool has been something that's been used at all levels of government, even down to the individual level of understanding broadband connectivity across Virginia. So we appreciate you guys working with us on this, and we're looking forward to this year's process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Herndon with Virginia Tech.
Hey, thanks, Chandler. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So this is the broadband submission portal, and this is where we collect the data from internet service providers in Virginia that populates the data that you see in the Commonwealth Connection mapping tool. I have several people from my team on the call, and I guess we'll hold questions until the end. And I have Javier Ramirez, he's our lead developer for the portal, and Mario Garza here as well as a GIS analyst and expert. And additionally, this recording will be available, but if anyone needs assistance in preparing their data or submitting to us, we're always here to help. So we're trying to make this as least painful as possible, but also as accurate as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Javier Ramirez, and he'll give a short demonstration of the submission process and where things are located in the submission portal. The submission portal has been open since October 15th for providers to submit their data, and it will close on December 1st. We will not do additional openings later this year as we did last year to get data if people fail to submit in time. So please note that if your data is not submitted by December 1st, it will not be included in the 2022 map. So with that, Javier, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Brandon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Like Brandon mentioned, I'm Javier Ramirez, and this that you see right now on your screen that we're broadcasting is the portal for submissions. The URL for the portal is in the chat box. I just pasted there so everyone can access. It's broadband-submission-portal.dhcd.virginia.gov. And this is the main page. So basically, this is the portal that providers use. Some of you might have experience from last year for submitting to this portal. This is where you would submit the information for the broadband services that you provide and where you provide them. Basically, what we're going to be discussing today is the requirements for a successful submission, how to submit the form, and the required documents for the submission. The importance of the accuracy of the submitted data, common mistakes that providers have sometimes with the submission, and any questions you might have about the entire process. Before we start with the submission itself, it's important that we talk about a little about the documents that are available here in the portal for you to get the details of how to create a successful submission. You can at any point go to the About page, and you'll get some information about the portal as well as some of those documents. But I'm going to jump straight into the form because everything you need is in the form. When you go to our menu here, you go to Submit Data. This is the form itself, and it contains all those documents I'm referring to. The first one being the submission guidelines over here for the year 2022, and it's a PDF document that contains basically the encompassing information about the submission process and all the requirements, as well as instructions on how to make petitions for inaccuracies. We also have a more technical document, the CSV and GIS instructions document, that offers you specific details as to the different formats you can submit the data, and the content and how it should be structured, This has a lot of information for anyone that's preparing the data to submit it to the form itself. We also have example files for the typical files you'll be uploading. As for example, we got CSV and shape files you can download. So you can see how an actual document should look like. You can compare it to the ones you're preparing. And we also have the VGen address data set, which is what we use to basically uniquely identify an address within Virginia. Each address, its unique address, has a unique ID, a VGen address point ID. And this download is a CSV file that contains for each address what's that number, so that you can use that in your GIS process for the addresses of the services you provide to match that ID. That is what we use to identify the location of each address, to know which type of service is offered in each address. And it's important that you use this download specifically. You can get VGen address point information directly from VGen. We're specifically using the 2022 third quarter version of the data. They make updates to that data every quarter, every year. So it's important that we use the same data set. And the easiest way to do that is to download directly here from the portal. Once you have an idea of the different documents you need to submit, then it's a matter of filling out the form and then submitting the documents. So what do you need for submission? You need to fill out the information for the submitter, the person that will be in charge of the submission, or the person that is the contact that in the event of any problem that might be with the submission, because we do verify them after they've been submitted. It was basically that point of contact for us, and the details about the provider, the company itself, and their website for the internet company that offers the services. Also, you need to upload the documents, and you can upload two different versions of that data. One is a CSV file that contains the details of the service with the different addresses, but also you can submit a shape file, a GIS shape file, which contains either point data or polygons that basically have the same data but in a different format. This upload manager will allow multiple versions, and it does different checks for that, depending on the upload, to help you make sure that you're submitting the correct information, but it doesn't check for everything. It does some simple checks to make sure that the most basic issues can be sorted out. But we also, on the back end, when we receive the data, we go through that comparison with the IDs and make sure that everything is how it should be. So let's fill up the form. I'm just going to add some basic information here. My name, I'm going to leave that empty on purpose. And I am going to add a file. First of all, a perfectly acceptable file. This is you see it's fairly fast, even with big files. Once you submit, in this case, a CSV file, if there's any issues at all, it'll let you know here. I'm going to add an incorrect file, for example, and it'll immediately tell you that there's a problem. It'll indicate what the problem is. In this case, there's one field, one header in the CSV file that does not exist. Sometimes that could be either because it's not there, or maybe it was truncated. Maybe it just says brand, or just says name, or a variation of that. Some GIS software, when you process the information, will cut off headers, although our spec for the headers is taking that into consideration. But this would be an example of that. Also, if you submit an invalid type of file, like a text file, which also happens sometimes, it should be named as a CSV. It might have the exact same data, but it will not allow you to upload other than the files is specified. So we're going to remove these files from here, which you can do. And for any CSV file that you upload, you can actually visualize the contents of it through a tool that we added this year. If you click here, visualize, it will open a map. And what it does is it loads that file and process it, and it's fairly fast. We right now can process around 1 million addresses in about 30 seconds, so it should be pretty fast. In this case, we have 900 of them, and what it does is just it shows you where those addresses are in the file, pinpointing exactly what you submitted. If there's any invalid points, it'll tell you how many there are. This doesn't mean it is an invalid submission per se. It depends on this. Sometimes GIS can it can have funky results, so it's important to pay attention to it and figure out what those invalid points are. It might still be a valid submission. So if that's the case, you can still submit it. It won't keep you from submitting it. If there's any bigger issues with it, we will sort those out and let you know. But this can support big files. I'm just going to upload here a 1.2 million address file, and it just pretty much processes it, uploads it, and then you can visualize them. I'm not going to click it. I'm going to say it's kind of like 30 seconds, but this is an example file. There's not much there except just scattered points. But you can upload those files and visualize them quickly. You can also upload shape files, and I'm going to upload here a list of shape files. And notice that I upload 4 of them, and that's because shape files have a minimum requirement of extensions that need to be with the same name. Basically, shape files are not just a single file. There are a minimum of 4 extensions here listed up here in that section for shape files that need to be there in order for us to be able to open them and work with them. Shape files can contain many more extensions, but these are the 4 ones that are required for the submission. So you can add all those in there. I'm going to remove all these. If there's at any point any issue with the submission, either in this area of the files up here, if you try to submit, it will let you know that the form is not complete and to check for issues. Here's one that shows you the problem. Here's another one that saying the title is missing. You can just add that title, remove the file that is incorrect. Once you submit, if there's no issues, it will present you with an acknowledgement message. You just click acknowledge, and it'll take a few seconds, and you'll get a confirmation window letting you know that it has been received. Once it's been received, you should get an email to the email that was listed on the form, letting you know that your request was received, and any issues we have with the submission, once we give it a check, we will communicate to that email that was in the form to ask any questions or let you know if there was a problem with the submission, and then you should resubmit the information. One of the best ways, this is all about getting valid, correct information for DHCD and for the public to have that accurate information about the broadband services that you provide and where you provide them. So it's important that that you understand how the region address point data set works, and that you use that as your main source of accuracy for your addresses. And there's different ways that is done, either through CSV files or through the process of GIS shape files. And so this is, like I mentioned, the most important source for that accuracy. Any data that is approximated or is not accurate, it means there's a level for interpretation, and with interpretation, what can happen is that we might have information that is not accurate for the services you provide. And when that goes out to the public, then people will say, I don't have internet in this area. So it's important that we are as accurate as possible with all that data. So common mistakes that occur when submitted that data that sometimes affect accuracy and other issues is one that I mentioned when submitting a file, a CSV file, missing headers or headers that are truncated. Like I said, some software will cut those names when it's converted. If you're working your GIS process and you're moving from one application to the other, sometimes that sort of stuff happens. Spaces are added and stuff like that. So to make sure that those are accurate, it's important. Another thing that happens is a lot of people tend to open CSV files using Excel, which is valid, but you should pay attention to what Excel does, because they sometimes try to convert numbers and fields into stuff that is not correct, like numbers that are really long, and region address IDs are really long numbers. Sometimes they apply scientific notation, which will, or they try to do averages or that sort of manipulation with cells. Any of that sort of stuff, when you save it, might change the, sometimes it adds a trailing number like zeros or stuff like that. So any modification like that will make that ID incorrect. So our recommendation in general is either don't open it with Excel if you can help it, or just pay attention to what Excel is doing with the file, so that make sure that it doesn't modify it. Another thing that sometimes happens is when you submit numbers, like for example, the max up and down values that are in megabytes per second. It should be just a number. For example, if you include 200 Mbps, that is an incorrect value. So that's something that happens. They just happen to have that information from other sources with the speed included, or it says 1 gigabyte. Like the speed should be in megabytes per second. So that is another thing that sometimes happens. And in terms of shape files, another thing that happens sometimes is that you offer the details about those points where those addresses are, or a polygon with the area, but you don't offer the other data for that particular feature inside of the shapefile. And by that, we actually mean the metadata. For each point in the shapefile, we need to know the speed, like basically the same fields that are part of that feature that is included in the shapefile. We need all the data. So sometimes we get shapes, but no values, no metadata for each shape. So to make sure that all those shapes have the data that we need. And like I mentioned, so with submitting, for example, a polygon, just say, well, I offer internet in this entire county. Well, that means we will include every single address within that polygon, that area. And if that's the case, then that's perfect. But if not, every point inside that will be associated with the data that you provide. So again, going back to the part of accuracy. So those are some of the common mistakes that can occur, and that is how you fill out the form and submit the documents. Are there any questions about this process or any other part of it? I think we have a few questions here in the. Can a company name be a trademark or brand name opposed to legal business name? I think it's pretty open, I believe. Submissions, it typically is we've had right. I think there's not restriction. I don't know if there's a
yeah, there's no
for it.
Yeah, I could try to answer most questions,
Right.
Javier. Yeah, there's currently no restrictions on what you put in the company name field. We've had several companies that had to submit several times, and interesting enough, each time they submitted, it was slightly different, either how they spelled it or.
That being said, that is the name that whatever name is used for when the submission is accepted and verified, that is the name that will be displayed on the portal. So that is the name that you want to be used for identify your company for the public.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted to mention as well is that you know, the CSV files are the preferred format matched to the VGen address points. For providers that submit shape files, like I said, we have to make the assumption that the shape file or the shapes that you send us, we have to make the assumption that all addresses located within those shapes are covered. I don't think that's the case for some of the shapes that some of the providers gave us last year. And remember, this map is only as good as the data that goes into it. So in order to be highly accurate, you know, the CSV is the preferred format. First one here, next question, Tim Harris, it says, I'm required to send the same data I send to the FCC. Are we going to accept it? I guess the question is, or the answer is, it depends. If you send us a CSV file with Fabric data, no, the main issue is that the FCC is currently using Fabric data from CostQuest, which is a proprietary data set this fabric data matches buildings. They do not do addresses. So for example, if there's 3 or 4 buildings at a particular address, that would be 3 or 4 different points. The way that Virginia is collecting data is by address, not by a particular building footprint. If the data that a provider is sending the FCC is simply a shape file, that's pretty easy to map addresses to that shape. It is not as easy if you submit us a CSV to map points to a CSV. We'll work with DHCD. I'm not sure what DHCD's stance on this is as far as if we will accept fabric submissions. My current understanding is that no, that we need the data in the VGen address point format in order to be the most accurate.
Hey, Brandon.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
I can weigh in on this one. And to point out, too, what's written in the guidelines, and Brandon and Javier have reiterated this, is that the way to ensure that we most accurately represent your submission is to submit using the VGen layer as the base layer. That's the language in the guidelines says strongly encouraged submission using that VGen base layer. That being said, we can try to work with other submissions of the FCC fabric, but Brandon's outlining some key caveats there too that, explain, why if you submit what you submitted to the FCC on September 30th, there's going to be some key limitations there, right? If you choose to submit that, what you submitted to the FCC back on September 30th or before, that's by location, like Brandon was saying, not by address. So, for the VGen point, we may have to assume that, if there's 6 addresses at that one location because it's an apartment building, we assume that, there's 6 addresses there at that one location are going to be served. So again, you're taking down our margin of error of misrepresenting your service territory data significantly by using the VGen base layer. And, again, we're open to have conversations too about, comparing what your FCC submission was back on September 30th for the BDC process. I would recommend scheduling a call, reaching out, and we can talk through it to see, how those two line up.
Yeah, and just
Can you hear my question? This is Tim. That
go ahead, Tim.
had that question. I guess my question and comment would be, we've known for a good while that we're required to send to you what we send to the FCC. You all, they have had that format determined for a while. Why haven't you all, in knowing what we are already required to send, adjusted your format to match that so that everybody can do one thing to send to both places? We're now required to have a professional engineer sign off on these FCC things. It's not like this doesn't cost us money, and to put extra time back into the same thing that we're already sending just so we can do it differently for you doesn't make sense.
Yeah, Chandler, I can try to from a mapping standpoint, I can try to answer that, and then from a policy standpoint, in the state level, you can answer after me, I guess. So, Tim, I do appreciate your concerns, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. On the mapping side, I think we're trying to get the most accurate map available. For comparison, at the state level, we do have access to the FCC fabric data. Currently, there is about 1.9, is it 1.9? Yeah, 1.9 million fabric data points roughly in Virginia. If you look at address points, we're at like 2.8 million. So there's almost 1 million points difference between FCC fabric locations and Virginia address points. And we're really not comparing the same things. In Virginia, we're looking at addresses and where service is located based on an address. For the FCC fabric, they don't care about if there's an address point without a building there. They don't care about that. However, for Virginia, that would be good to know, because if in jurisdictions, if you have developments are looking to expand or things of that nature, you want to know where their service is, regardless if there is a structure there or not. That's my opinion. Like I said, I could let Chandler answer in the future. Also, you said, the FCC has had this out for a while. We actually had our process in place before the FCC did by about a year. So, we're not, we could change to the fabric, but right now, on a mapping side and information standpoint on where service is, I don't think that mapping the fabric and providing that to the public is the best way to represent where coverage currently is in Virginia. Using the quarterly address data set that the state generates at the state level, I believe provides a more accurate information for jurisdictions and citizens to use, as well as providers.
The only thing I'd add there, Brandon, is that a lot of this also boils down to making sure we help the FCC get their new maps right. In terms of the quality of data, we're striving to help the FCC through the challenge process of the fabric, through the challenge process of serviceable locations in Virginia, make sure that their maps are correct, because that's what's going to determine how much money Virginia receives under the BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. So again, having this process, ensuring that we're considering locations accurately as Virginia considers locations at the address level is important for us to make sure that Virginia gets its fair share under the BEAD program. That's the only thing I would add to Brandon's points there. But it looks like we have another question in the chat box too from Sarah Holman. Do we use the FCC data? Do we use the FCC date of June 30th? Brandon, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, sure. In the past, we've done the date that the portal first opens as the date of record. So for this year's collection, we're going to use October 15th, 2022 as of date for your data. So, whatever your coverage was as of October 15th, 2022 will be the date that we display on the Commonwealth Connection map for this coming year as the date of the data. Next is the VGen database organizer, sortable by county, etc. Mario could probably answer this, but I believe that yes, those are specific fields within that address database. Yeah, Javier's pulling it up here now.
Yeah, this is the
there's a municipality field, looks like on column 18 for a municipality,
right,
to sort by county, and then the
FEEPS IDs for counties. There's the county names, that's SIP codes, as well as a Latin longitude, which is what offers you the location. Yeah, it's a lot of information here for each unique address.
And there's also some census. I saw FIPS on there, so next to the county, so it is very easily sortable.
Yeah, I know last year there were some challenges, especially with smaller ISPs, to provide us CSV files that they were having trouble joining their address information to the table that VGen provides for the VGen address points. I understand this challenge if you're not, don't have someone versed in GIS, even though it is a fairly simple join that can be performed. We would prefer that address join be done on the provider side, so that you have control of your data and that you know what you're sending us. We did accept some smaller providers to give us just addresses in that format without the address point filled in, and we did the best we could to match those addresses up to the VGen address points for that unique ID. If you send us the unique ID, then you know what you're giving us and you're 100% in control of your data. If you give us just addresses, and sometimes people spell addresses differently, can have things in slightly different formats. So that's why we like that unique ID that VGen provides for the address points. But as I said before, if you don't have that GIS expertise in your office, we can work with you to get it in the VGen format. Or if you just want to send us addresses, we can work with you on how to send us addresses in a CSV so that we can attempt to map them for you. But we do like that control to be in the provider, what they give us, instead of having us make assumptions on, is this the street that's slightly misspelled or named, does this match this other street that is in the VGen record?
So I want to add on to that. So those of you who did this last year may have experienced an issue where you needed like Esri ArcGIS. I reached out to VGen after last year, and they included the information needed on the standard shapefiles, which you can open it and utilize it in any open source free GIS software like QGIS. There's abilities to import this into Microsoft Access to join the address data with your data that you may already have and that already completed. And that's it for that.
Yeah, so the basic presentation's done on how to submit. We're here if you need us, and we're also here for a few minutes. We have some time if anyone has any additional questions.
Another change that we did this year is that if you submitted last year, the CSV and GIS guidelines are slightly different. They're more to match some of that you send to the FCC, such as brand name instead of provider ID. The business residential code is exactly the same. So I definitely do suggest reading through the guidelines to see what you need to submit. Theoretically, the only thing that's different than FCC's is we're using VGen instead of Fabric.
Yeah, so we did change our header names to more closely match what the FCC requires.
Well, with that, if there aren't any more questions, we appreciate folks jumping on. I think what we'll do is Brandon, Mario, Javier, if we can hang out, perhaps if folks have a question towards the end of the call, we'll do that. But we appreciate folks joining. That concludes the formal portion, at least. And if you feel free to jump off, but if you have a couple of questions, feel free to hang around. So we appreciate the time and look forward to working with you guys.